Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Ghost Show. We are back. We've had a bit of a hiatus, mostly because of me, because I've been filming for the last, 4 weeks or so on a new TV show called Spectral Threats. So that's going to be really interesting when it hits the TV screens, but so we're back. And this topic, Ian, we talked about before I took the break to go and do the show. We are going to do Resusci Annie or Rescue Annie. This is the resuscitation doll that has been used for the better part of 60, 70 years now to train in CPR and that type of, response to a person drowning or having perhaps a heart attack or some medical moment that requires resuscitation. So before we get started on the story of how this all came about, have you ever taken a CPR course or done some type of first aid course that's used this doll, if you like?
Never used a doll, but yes, I have taken a CPR course once upon a time. Mm-hmm. Way back in high school, I was in what they called the canoe club.
Oh.
And basically what that was, it was a student trip up to Algonquin Park that we spent, 4 or 5 days canoeing around Algonquin Park. And as part of the structure that we had to go through with the teachers was that we all had to learn CPR. Okay. In case there was an emergency up there in the middle of nowhere, right? That we would have had to deal with.
Okay, so some familiarity then, and I had to take a CPR course when I was a flight attendant back in the 80s. So I was trained using the Resusci Annie or Rescue Annie. And I had no idea about this story at the time when it may have changed my mind about actually interacting with this doll. But if people are not familiar with it, it is a device used to essentially learn how to do chest compressions or to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And so the doll has been in use, like I say, since the 1950s, and it's sometimes a full-on doll, like sometimes it's a full person, right? And other times it's just sort of from the waist up, no arms, no limbs, just a head and an upper torso, so that you can learn to do these chest compressions and counting and or the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which a lot of people don't want to do anymore, but there are devices now that you can get to put in your mouth so that you're not literally touching mouth to mouth anymore to do this. But I want to start off by talking about the story of Resusci Annie, because I think it's important for us to understand where this all comes from, because it's really pretty creepy as heck when
it is, yeah.
You get right down to it. It's got one of those sort of weird histories that, like so many things, is unexpected and yet, has kind of changed over the years. I think her look has changed a little bit, but initially the face is where we want to get started on this. The doll itself, I'm going to go kind of through the history and talk about, sort of where it all began. And originally, this Resusci Anne was inspired by a death mask. Makes you want to really use the device, right? But it was inspired by this death mask of a young woman who was found in the Seine River in the 19th century in Paris. And in the 1960s, they developed this CPR training mannequin. And the person that developed that was Osmond Ladreau, and he was a toy maker in conjunction with Bjorn Lind, who was an anesthetologist. And he was really kind of the one that said, we need something like this for training. And so they worked together to develop this product. So, any questions so far? No, not so much. All right. So I want to kind of get into the real detailed history of this because I'm really fascinated by it. Yes, I'm weird and I like the macabre, and I find these sometimes stories are, what's the word I'm looking for, or the phrase, truth is often stranger than fiction, because this is truth in this story. So the inspiration, again, comes from this young woman. And pardon my French because it's not fabulous, but La Inconnue de la Seine. So she was the unknown woman of the Seine. She was drowned in the river somewhere around 1880, in the late 1880s. And when her body was discovered, it was in fairly good condition. So clearly she hadn't been in the water for a very long time because, as maybe you may or may not know, when a body stays in the water for a while, it looks pretty distorted and bloated and quite unlike what the person may have looked like in life. So this pathologist, after they pulled the body out of the river and I guess sent her to the morgue, this pathologist was, for a lack of a better word, captivated by her beautiful face. Yeah, pretty weird. I mean, I can understand looking at, the victim and thinking, oh my gosh, she's so young and pretty or beautiful, how sad. But it gets a little weirder than that as we get into the story, because at this time, he now decides to commission a plaster cast of her face. So he wants to create a death mask of her. I feel like this is a little beyond normal. I don't know how you feel about it. Do you not find that a little strange? Dead girl.
It is. And actually that takes me to something that I saw on Facebook. Just a few days ago, there was a post that I saw basically along the same lines.
Right.
And it went one step further, that same idea. There was this young woman, I forget what it was in the article, how this woman passed away, but the guy who was the guy at the morgue.
Right, the pathologist or the coroner. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the coroner.
Right.
And same thing, he was obsessed with this young woman, but he went a step further from what you're saying, and he took the entire body home with him.
Oh dear.
And encased it in a light layer of plaster to preserve it.
Okay.
And then dumped like a gallon of perfume all over it every month to try to
hide the decomposition that's going on.
And it's like, oh God, that's just,
yeah.
That's just morbid.
So now we have this pathologist, right? So he creates this plaster cast of her face, and in a weird turn of events, this woman becomes a popular motif, her face, in the Parisian Bohemian society. So her face ends up getting used for not just these Resusci dolls, but even goes as far as, some well-known artists painting, their rendition of her. Even Mucha Postera has a kind of weird lilt on a couple of images that look a lot like this young woman. So we have this strange sort of, obsession with this young girl. And the weird thing is that no one ever claimed her body. So we don't know who she was. We have no idea of her name, where she was from, who she was, or how she ended up in the river. There was no visible signs of trauma on her body. So if she was murdered, there was no, and I mean, this is 1880, so, there could have been some kind, she could have been suffocated or strangled. They may not have caught that. She may have taken her own life. We don't really know. But nobody seems to know who she is. So as we get into a later sort of weirdness of this whole thing, there becomes this creation for the resuscitation equipment, right? And this is the Norwegian toy maker who decides that the face is a nice face, and so thinks that perhaps this would be the face of this resuscitation device, and that it really, again, nobody knew who she was, so it's kind of anonymous, right? There's no name or family or anything to be attached to this. So he starts collaborating with these doctors, the anesthetologist, and some more doctors, actually, a Peter Saffer and a James Elam, to refine the design, to make it realistic enough for a teaching tool for CPR. So to get into the actual doll itself, or the device, it originally had a collapsible chest that you could use to practice chest compressions. And then it had slightly opened lips, like, sort of pursed lips, that you could use to do the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So this was the idea. And weirdly enough, I mean, none of us growing up, we grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and whenever. Did we ever hear this story about this resuscitation device, this Resusci-Ann or Resusci-Annie? No, I had not.
I never did.
And then we now have these weird offsprings of this doll. So Resusci-Annie, and I'm going to go back and talk about her a little bit more in her lifetime, but Resusci-Annie also spawns other dolls. So we end up with Resuscitation Andy, because, you don't want to just have a feminine, you want to have the masculine. And then Baby Annie, so that you can learn, CPR and resuscitation techniques on children and babies and toddlers. So it really does go in a real weird direction in so many ways, is that, you're trying to resuscitate essentially a doll that has a dead woman's face. I don't know. I find that pretty weird.
Well, I find the entire idea of death masks just kind of disturbing, actually.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, it's just the thought of you're taking this deceased body and you're taking a likeness of their face off the corpse, and it's like,
right.
It's it's disturbing. I saw a photo of. Now, I've never actually seen a death mask myself.
Okay.
But I've seen photos of them.
Right.
And I saw one actually of Napoleon.
Yes, I have seen Napoleon.
It was just creepy. It's the look on his face that
Yeah, I mean it's funny too because many years ago when we still had our shop, the Spiritorium, and we had moved locations and we were up in Waterdown at the flea market on the weekends. There was a lady across from us who had a, a sort of ephemera booth, so she had thousands of postcards and all kinds of just gift cards and many different paper items. And she came over to me one day and she brought this postcard over and she goes, "This is for you." And I didn't know anything about it at the time. I mean, I wasn't, and it was this little cradle. And on the bottom of it, it was Mary Queen of Scots' cradle when she was an infant. And I was like, "Oh, cool. Thank you." I don't recall ever telling her that, we have a connection on my grandfather's side of the family. His mother's side are Stuarts. I don't remember telling her that. But at the same time, about maybe 2 weeks later, she comes back with another postcard and it's Mary Queen of Scots' death mask. So they also took a death mask of Mary. And I'm wondering, did they take it? Obviously, they took it after her head was cut off because, yeah, right? So they took the imprint of her face after they beheaded her. And that is now in a museum. And then they've since made wax mold impressions of that face. And it is a little weird that we look really quite similar. So interestingly enough, as I said, I kind of want to go back to the woman herself. And we don't have a lot of information about her, as I said. But we also just have to wonder, of all of the young ladies that ended up in the morgue during the 1880s in Paris, why this one in particular? Why her? And are there any others out there that ended up being, their faces being used for other things? Were they used for art? Were they used for who knows what?
It's possible.
I mean,
It's possible.
It's such a weird topic, right? It really is. And I mean, I understand why, they wanted to maybe keep the face, but it is just bizarre when you see this death mask and this woman. And then you look at, in the 1970s, there's this whole sort of soft body doll, right? That with the hands and feet and she's wearing like a blue Adidas kind of, track suit from the time. And she came in a suitcase and you could take her apart. There's just some very strange, weird, concepts behind this piece. But at the end of the day, again, why did this guy take such a liking to her? I mean, that he felt so compelled to create a death mask of her face. And I know I've read a lot of stories and they go young girl, and I'm going to say she wasn't as young as some people believe her to be. Because when we say young girl, what's the age range that you're going to think? I think she was probably about 18, 19, somewhere there's about. She might have even been in her early 20s. But yeah. And there's unfortunately not a lot of story in between to fill in the lines. I was trying to find out, how did the toy maker end up with the death mask of Annie, or Mona Lisa of the Sun? It doesn't really tell us how they ended up with this death mask to use as a model for the resuscitation device. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but I did some pretty thorough digging and I could not come up with an answer for that. So my suspicion to that is that it ended up in a private collection somewhere that somebody purchased, and it kind of found its way through into somebody else's hands. in some collection that was being sold off, whether by pieces or an entire collection. And this toy maker thought that because the face looked so sweet, that it would make for a nice face on a victim of, circumstance, hence, heart attack, drowning, whatever it might be.
It's
So
possible. Yeah.
it's an unusual story, and short and sweet and to the point, but it's again will make you wonder and ponder, who this young lady was, and again, how many times we've gone out there and taken these courses not realizing the backstory behind it. So now we have that.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.